David, thanks for coming and talking to us, and I give you the floor. Yeah.
Um, well, Tom, you've just sort of indicated a sort of rough order of events. I might therefore start off by just talking about how I got involved in the first place, but also what I see the options are for the North American Guild. Um, I got involved nearly 10 years ago now, so with about a year after art had started in the first place. I've been a teacher all my life, either in the school systems or universities, and then more recently running a number of companies that still deal with education, educational software, publishing, and what have you. But I'm not a dexterous person. That's one of the reasons why I very much like being a software engineer, because you can actually sit down and create things just by typing. I did once make do a carpentry course, and I've made a table. It's very well made, I have to say. It's very small, and in terms of the amount of time and effort I put in, it's probably worth about $50,000. If I were to sell it, it might make five if I'm lucky. But well, the point of this story is I didn't ever see myself as teaching anything like carpentry or weaving or any physical skill, because I'm not very good at them. And one of the things I learned from the M1 that I went across to in England in the first place is actually um, it is possible, and I have done since. I hadn't done any teaching of ringing before then, and I really enjoy it. Um, I've always said the ability to teach is some sort of genetic defect. I think if you've got it, you can't really stop yourself, and I find it very enjoyable doing that with ringing. What I see as the role for this coming session, I think it might be best, Tom, if you could say something about where you think the North American Guild is generally at the moment as regards teaching in general and its relationship with ART in particular.
Yeah. Sue, Irene, help me out. And we tried to get a track. We sent out a survey. I guess we kind of started with that and tried to get a feel for what people wanted. I think there's a sense that we could do training better,
Mm-hmm.
and how we do that. Part of it is getting people, so spread out in North America, but the people who are training, get them in connection with each other and support each other. That was one thing I remember. I think,
I think there.
and I don't think we really started out talking about art classes. We kind of gradually got there. There's some. I know Greg Russell has had kind of a program of training with his group in Boston, and teaching other people, and I like what he's done a lot. And we were originally talking about having a course that he was arranging, and getting that set up was work, certainly. And the art classes are in some sense kind of ready to go. And I think that was part of how we gravitated toward the art classes.
Yes.
I think in terms of what will work, I remember when I was early on in my ring career, I found it interesting that if you're through in a court appeal and the striking's getting a bit wobbly and everyone's getting a bit tired, the conductor would say, "Yeah, okay, let's speed up a little bit," and everything would improve. Or sometimes they say, let's just slow down a little bit, and everything would improve. And I thought, how on earth do they know whether to speed up or slow down? And it was a long time before I realized that it really doesn't matter. If you just alter things, people start concentrating, and that's what makes it better. It's not the faster or slower, it's the let's make a change to make us concentrate. I think with what you said about teaching standards generally, it's the same. If you have an initiative, it doesn't matter very much what the initiative is. It will be a bit of a waking up and a fresh start and reinvigorating. So to that extent, it doesn't matter what courses you run. It's just running courses will help. I think it's also art occasionally feels that it's all its material is tremendously copyright and individual and intellectual property, and it really isn't. There is very little. I don't mean this as criticism at all. I mean it's a compliment. When I went along to the original M1 and M2 in UK, even though I wasn't a teacher, I hadn't been learning that long by then, and there was no suggested exercise or comment or suggestion in any of the practical things that I hadn't met before. And equally in the module 2, there were none of the, I think there was one practice method, penultimate, that I'd never met before, but all the other ones, they were being used. So there isn't anything particularly original. And for that reason, if you get someone else to design a course, it would probably overlap to a very large extent. The details might be a bit different. Equally in the theory sessions, if you are a teacher in the general sense, not in necessarily a bringing, most of what they say is fairly obvious. But if you're not a teacher, less so. I'll come back to that in a minute. So again, it's not that art has the one particular answer or the best way of doing it. It's just that it's been put together in a very well organized package. It's the gathering of it together, and also therefore the uniformity across the world that are the main benefits. In terms of bad teaching, I'm not going to be either polite or rude about North American Guild because I've no idea, but certainly it is the case that there was very little bad teaching in Australia and New Zealand. I would love to say that's because we're such a marvelous pair of countries and we do everything brilliantly, but that's not unfortunately the reason. Much the same is, for example, the Scottish Guild, Scottish Association, and I think it's largely demographic. If you don't have that many towers and they're fairly widely spread out, of necessity, you have to cooperate with each other. You have to visit other towers. You have to see what other people are doing, and that's what generates good teaching. You go around, you observe other people, you pick up their good ideas, you give them some of your good ideas, and you all get better as a result. That was not the case in England, and I suspect that's because there are so many towers. We talk about isolated towers. You'll have towers that are isolated. We have some that are. I get very annoyed when people in the UK say, "Oh, it's I've got to drive 50 miles to get there. I'm doing a round trip to our association festival, about 4,000." But the isolated towers, to my mind, have always been the towers in UK where Lower Pudlington is 200 meters down the road from Upper Pudlington, but no, we don't talk to them.
Yeah.
And that form of isolation leads to ingrained habits, and they could be good ingrained habits, but quite often they're bad ingrained habits. And without that diversity and going and seeing other people, they don't change and they tend to get worse and worse. So there was a much greater need for improving the standards of teaching in the UK than there was in England, than there was certainly in Australia or New Zealand or Scotland or a few other places. But I think it is the putting things together. I think from what we said, if you're wanting to do a bit of a sort of kicking people into action teaching wise, any form of courses would achieve that. Doing the art ones has the advantage that they are standardized. They're all sort of pre-prepared. So that's a great advantage. But what I see is that I'm coming out to help to run some courses, at the end of which you'll be in a better position to judge whether to go fully down the art track or not. I found in Australia, I think that much the best part is the Module 1 and the Module 2C. They're nearly always extremely popular. And one of the things that was different between us and the UK, which is because we came along slightly later and we could learn from their mistakes, art in UK has always had a bit of a reputation of being a little bit we know best and trying to tell people what to do. That's not the intention, and I don't think it's a deserved reputation, but you can see how, particularly if people are rather stuck in the mud, that attitude would develop. And I don't think enough was done to counter that impression. And there is still, even now, 10 years down the track, that feeling in a few places, a bit of resentment towards art. We managed to avoid that by having the good idea of inviting all our experienced teachers along. And we had some very good teachers. So in the first year or two of operation, pretty much all of our people who were teaching came along to the course, and their attitude as a result was positive. Most of them said, well, look, I've been teaching for a long time. I'm not actually going to join up with ART. I'm not going to teach exactly the way they say. I'll do it my way. But it's been very interesting. I think there's a lot of good sense in that. It's a good idea. It'll work well. I'm very much in favour. Good luck. So there wasn't any of that sort of opposition. I think that's best summed up by one of the feedback forms, particularly a particularly good teacher, I think it was in Perth. His feedback was, I came a skeptic, I left enthused. And that really says it all. The going on aspects, I think another good thing that the art modules and the whole art procedure allows you to do, if you wish, is that people who are teachers, whether it's trainee teachers or they go through full accreditation, are then able to sign students up to learning the ropes scheme. And that, I would say, is also something that works very well. It's very useful to be able, with a student, to give them the student record booklet, and they can see what's coming up, what they've done, what they haven't done, what they've sort of done but need a bit more practice at. And having that physical record that they can check their progress is extremely good. Some of them then actually like getting the badges and the certificates and what have you. Quite a few don't. I find typically of the people I've taught, they mostly do learning the ropes level 1, which is basically, can you handle a bell by yourself pretty accurately, fairly safely most of the time, and level 2, which is really the same criteria, a little bit more advanced, but basically, yes, you definitely are. You are safe to ring by yourself. You don't need a supervisor. You can now join in and start ringing around to other people. A little bit further than that. Up to that stage, mostly you're teaching them one-on-one, and you can do the assessment for them, and you can get the certificate. And sometimes they just get the certificate. Sometimes, I know one of us younger ringers who was also a server at the cathedral, he got presented with his certificate at the end of the morning service with a great palaver. Much was made of it, so it's good publicity. Quite often when you go on to doing level 3, 4 and 5, and by the time you've done level 5, you've run several court appeals inside, and you're a ringer who, you may not be a sort of a black zone, but you could go to just about any tower anywhere and you would be welcome as someone who can contribute. But by that stage, a lot of people feel that they're not so much your student anymore, although you have a supervisory role. They're much more a part of the group. Right, and the actual ticking the box and passing the certificates becomes less relevant. Yes. So that's fine. But that scheme, certainly in the early stages, and some people all the way through, works very, very well. Things that work less well, I think, are the whole matter of keeping an eye on people. The mentor scheme. That's very well intentioned, but it right from the beginning, the difficulty was, but again, looking at the England situation, there was a lot of ingrained bad teaching. If you go along from your tower and get all these new ideas, unless there's someone in the area who's already done the course, of course, in the early days there weren't, and is a good teacher and can keep an eye on you, you're rather on your own. And that is very difficult. We do mentoring rather differently. I mean, in the early days, first courses, you went along and you paired people up as teachers and trainee teachers and mentors who were meant to be a bit more experienced. That obviously couldn't work in Australia. If we had a gathering in Melbourne, you couldn't pair off a teacher from Perth with a mentor in Wellington. It's not going to work. So we, as tutors, tend to keep rather more of an eye on students and are there to be helped, which is okay. And added to which, the fact that there is more of a general swirl of people visiting other towers helps. But the actual formal mentor versus teacher role doesn't work very well. It doesn't work very well for us. It doesn't work very well in UK. It is getting a little bit better now. They've decided. The other problem was, in the early days, a lot of people went through and became accredited teachers who weren't actually very good because there wasn't much quality control there. And that's something that art's been criticised for a lot. I think probably rather more than it deserves. There have been moves in recent years to try and improve that by making it more like a driving test. So now, although if you become, say, a module 1, so you're learning to teach people to ring, part of the process is that you will, with your mentor or buddy or whoever it is, so this can be done within the tower, you'll do a number of lessons that are actually commented on. You write notes in advance, you say what you're going to do, you then afterwards comment on what worked and what didn't work. Or in the case of module 2, you normally comment on why you couldn't possibly do any of the things that you put so much effort into planning, because Fred, who was going to help because he could ring what such and such, didn't turn up, so you had to completely change your plans. But it is a form of assessment, and it is a form of improvement and stopping and retrospectively looking over what you did and discussing it with someone. That can be done entirely within the tower. It doesn't need a tutor or an assessor or anything like that. But once you've done 4 of those, and it is felt that you are ready to be assessed, someone who is now has the formal role of assessor will come along. And so the intention is it's like a driving test. If you fail, it doesn't mean you're an awful driver who's going to crash all the time. It means you've got a little bit to go still in 1-2 areas, and that needs further improvement. We'll come back and have another test a bit later on. So that is in the process of improving standards. We don't have specific assessors in Australia because we've got 4 tutors for 400 or 500 ringers, which is a very generous proportion. We need it for geographic reasons, and I imagine it'll be the same. But that means that those 4 people tend to do all the assessing as well. In the UK, there's only probably less than 20 for 40,000 ringers, and they're flat out just running the courses. So they just don't have time. I mean, the last time I ran a course in UK was that was an M1. It would be about 9 months ago, like last time I was there. And that is in an area where art is not well established. There aren't particularly good records of teaching, but there's quite a lot of new recruits coming in. And for that group, we still run monthly meetings, which are just, how's it going? What problems have you got? And frequently someone comes along and says, oh, look, I've got this student and I really don't know how to cope with this, and describes the problem, and everyone makes suggestions. That sort of thing is excellent. You might wish to consider doing that in North America, but the tutors just would be rushed. Just completely, the work would be too great if they tried to do that. So the point I'm making is it's for you to decide whether to go down the art path or not, and I hope that by the end of July I'll be in a much better position to choose that. I hope you will do that, because I think the benefits vastly outweigh the disadvantages, but it's your call. And certainly if you choose to run your own courses and not go down through the whole learning the ropes or anything like that, that is an option, but that's your call, and the decision is something that would be made in a month or two once we've got through all this.
But with it, can I ask a question? What art thinks it's going to do then with the assessment part of it and giving you a certificate to say you've passed or you haven't passed? So everybody who does the M1 course will have to pass at some point, or people can just say, well, I don't want to be assessed. I can just, I've done the course. That's enough for me.
Both.
Okay.
We find that we are slightly, let me say right at the beginning, art originally set out to be training for people who intended to be teachers, which is fine. I mean, as the name suggests, it is the Association of Bringing Teachers. We have always been a little bit more lenient, or set rather a lower bar. We find that particularly, well, with each of the modules actually, with M1, quite a few people who haven't been ringing that long will come along, and I certainly did. They found out much more about their own handling and what's working well and what isn't. And particularly if they do that fairly on in the piece, you can actually make changes if you want to. I mean, we all know really excellent top-class ringers who've got an abysmal style. You're not going to try and change that, nor is there any reason to. As long as they're ringing effectively, that's fine. But it is better to have a good style, because you tend to progress quicker earlier on. So it's to be encouraged. Right. But we are entirely happy with people who come along and say, I want to find out more about how to ring, to be honest, mostly for my own benefit, to make me a better ringer. But, on occasion in the tower, if we have a few learners, they quite often want someone just to help or keep an eye, and I might do that without actually being a full teacher. I'd sort of be a teacher's helper. That's absolutely fine. Equally, we've had we tend to do module 2C, mostly because the ability to gather people together in one place and run one of these things is rather few and far between. So the more we can get through in a given day, the better. So we do the one that goes further. It goes right up to method ringing.
Right.
Whereas in UK it's M2F, which basically is up to, it's sort of call changes, ringing with other people, rounds, and that more that sort of stuff. We have always accepted people who typically might be in one of our newer towers. They've been ringing for 2 or 3 years. There is a teacher who comes in to visit them once a week, but occasionally the teacher can't get there, or they feel that we really should be helping. We should be looking after ourselves a bit more. So, look, can I come along? I don't want to become the ringing master or the tower captain. I mean, maybe in 5 years, but not at the moment. But I do feel that if I knew a bit more, I'd be able to help if our teacher can't be there that time, as to sort of what to do, how to look after people, how to run a practice, that sort of thing, not in order to do it full time, just to help out. Oh, and by the way, I believe it's a requirement, which it is in UK, that you've got to have run a couple of court appeals. I forget the exact details, but you have to be able to do the exercises yourself. And we find that particularly towards the end, they're not up to bringing the exercises, and that's fine. As we'll find with people like that who are not experienced ringers at all, if you're doing something like, say, original, if you've got a good set of teachers who are good ringers and they're just there to learn new stuff, I find that even if you've got 12 people on a course, which is about the maximum I think I could cope with, you can sit down, stand up rather, in the tower, tell them what original is, just in case they don't know. Call a simple touch with just bobs every now and then, and everyone understands firstly what it is you've done, what the touch you've called is, how to do it themselves, how to get it right, because they get it right first time, and at the same time appreciate what it's for, which in that particular exercise would be to encourage people not to be scared of when you're ringing playing Bob Minor, oh, I'm coming up to dodging 5/6, is it up or down? And oh God, if there's a bob, oh no, I'm unaffected. Oh, but next time, do I make this one or not? You get panic. Oh, there wasn't a call. Thank goodness. In original, you're just ringing. If there's a call, you react, do something, and how you carry on afterwards is dead easy. You just go back to playing hunting. So that's the purpose of it, and the attendees will all pick up the purpose. If you have a less good group, you may find that everybody has to do it 3 times. The first time they try it, and oh, sorry. Oh, I see what you mean now with Bob. I thought it was going to be with the treble there. Oh, okay, got it now. Can we try again? So they get it wrong. And then the second time they get it right. Good, jolly good. Yes. Oh, wow, that was great. I enjoyed that. Okay, what would you use it for? Oh, hadn't thought. I don't know. So they've been able to do it, but they haven't appreciated where or why you would use it. So the third time you say, well, maybe you don't ring, just watch and think how this will help people. And with the people who observe us, we would tend to say, look, don't ring this, because probably you won't get it right anyway. But even if you do, your whole brain effort is going into trying to ring it and get it right. We want you to appreciate for later on, when you're at that stage, why this exercise might be useful.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, we're talking about how it would work in North American Guild if you go down the art path. It is not my role specifically to train people who can then go into the role of tutor, partly because I think that's something that has to be handled from the UK. I have trained the Australian tutors, other than the other one who started at the same time as I did. But I think that really is something that David Spalding or the UK authorities need to do. As it happens, though, in any case, there is a fairly clearly laid down path of steps you have to go through to become now an assessor, which is not something we do in Australia, and then a tutor. And it does involve doing modules a number of times. So initially, you probably go along as just as attendee for M1. And quite a lot of people in Australia then do a second one just because, I've got a lot out of that. I've never gone to an M1, whether I'm taking it or not, where I haven't done something new myself. And I've probably done about 40 or 50 of them there. I've lost my thread now. So if someone is aiming to be a tutor in due course, they will do the original M1. They'll probably do a second one just with someone else to see that it's a bit different. That's fine. Then they'll start doing it helping. So there'll probably be one where they are going along more with a different mindset. It's not, oh, I'm going to learn how to teach a brand new ringer the art way. It's more, I'm going to attend this course and contribute and make comments, but next time it might be me that's doing this. So I'll think, observe it and join in and participate with a view that this is something that in the not too distant future I might be doing myself. And certainly that's what I'll be doing with a number of people during this tour. And then the final step before actual formal qualification as a tutor is then you do one where you actually don't just contribute and join in and make comments and be rather more active than you otherwise would, but you actually run one or two of the theory sessions or one or two of the practical sessions. And it's just possible that that might happen right at the end. If people have done that step, that would probably be in the Quebec one. It then becomes possible for David and the powers that be to say, yes, you're now a tutor. They would probably want to do some further check, but David and I share the view. I think that communicating by Zoom is fine, but actually teaching a physical skill or observing someone via virtually is not nearly as good. It's not impossible, but if we've got someone whose skills are known, they've gone through all the other steps, David feels it would be quite possible to do a sort of tick the box final assessment of watching them doing something. So it might be that say, well, yes, you can run a course now. We'll just observe in the background what's going on, perhaps make the odd comment here and there, but that will be your final check. And that even though doing it remotely is not ideal, that is at least an option. Added to which I'm hoping that yes.
Well, just a question. I keep hearing the term shadowing. Shadowing.
Right. That is a term that, so if you're going along on a module, you might be an observer, meaning it doesn't actually count for it anything. You're just going along to have a look. Or as I said, we sometimes have newish ringers, particularly for 2C, who can't ring the more advanced exercises. So we say they've been there to observe. They can't then start training people themselves, but they've just learned a lot. Most people are attendees. But if you're shadowing, there are two possible meanings for this. One is if you are a tutor either formally in training or just someone who is lining up to be a tutor, then you would come along and, as I say, your mindset is predominantly, it's not sort of definitely one or the other, but you're there predominantly not to learn for M1 how to teach learners, although hopefully there'll be a bit of progress there. You're going along to gain experience so that in due course you can run similar courses yourself. If that is your mindset and the intention, then you would be shadowing, meaning you're observing someone else. It's also called shadowing when you do the one where you're actually running half of it yourself, but you're not the official tutor. You're running it with someone else.
And isn't shadowing also once you become a tutor,
yes.
and then you have to go back and shadow a tutor again to keep your skills up?
Yes. That is the final meaning. That one is the original meaning. But we are asked as tutors from time to time to go and watch someone else. Now, in the UK, does it rather differently from Australia. In UK, if you shadow, I would say go along to your course, and I would just be observing. And rather like the shadowing where you're in training, you think, oh, I didn't do that way. Oh, well, they've added this bit in. I don't do that, or just something to make sure that people don't gradually drift apart over time. But you're the shadower and they're the tutor. Although you are a fully qualified teacher, it's just as Eileen said, you're just keeping in touch. In Australia, we've always had, because we've got more tutors, our gatherings are fewer and further between, we always intend, and about 85% of the time succeed in having two tutors present. And in terms of the UK requirement that you should watch someone else tute from time to time, we achieve that by having two people. So it isn't that one's in charge and the other isn't. We nominally say, look, I'll do the first and third theory, you do the second and fourth. I'll do the first two practicals, you do the second two practicals, but the other person is there. And we find it's much less stressful. You're not worrying the whole time of whether you've forgotten something, because if you have, the other person will tell you. And frequently, there's something that you're not very good at that you just say, oh, we're doing this now. Look, Kathy, can you do this? Or if you're demonstrating something that's a bit awkward, you can ask them to be your co-demonstrator, and they'll get it exactly right. So that form of keeping in touch with each other we do by co-tutoring. UK hasn't got the resources to be able to do that. It is the case, though, that we do worry a bit that the Australian and New Zealand courses might, because we're four people who are used to working with each other, they might over time gradually drift away from the UK ones. And there's not really too much we can do about that. I go over for fairly frequently. I have been going over fairly frequently. I think those days are coming to an end. I'm hoping that Kathy, who's taken over as the education officer and is one of the tutors, will take over that role a bit more. But that is a problem, yes. And I think it's both good and bad. I mean, as I said earlier, the quality of teaching and the whole rigging situation in Australia and New Zealand is different from UK. And if our courses therefore are slightly different and have their own flavour, that's good. And another thing I always do, the PowerPoint presentations are one that ART puts out, and they change them from time to time. It's been a fairly big review recently. Personally, it was the same when I was classroom teaching. I won't use textbooks. I mean, if the kids want to use them, that's fine. But you have your own style of presentation. You do things your way. And when I go through the PowerPoint presentations, I always alter them. I think there are a few things that they haven't said, or there's something that needs improving, or look, we said this 15 times already, let's get rid of that slide to save a bit of time. So one personalizes them in a way that I hope doesn't make them better, it makes them more suitable for you and your way of doing things.
Great. That's what a good teacher does.
Yes, exactly. Yes, you'll find during, well, you've been through them, you know, but during the theory sessions, the point that if you're trying to explain something, the traditional English approach of dealing particularly with people who don't speak English is you explain it the way you think it needs explaining. If they don't understand, you do it again louder. The point that actually if something doesn't get across, try it differently, split it up into bits, is made over and over again. And all the teachers who are good teachers already get completely bored silly at that point, but particularly in the UK courses, a lot of people are not good teachers, and it really does need saying because a lot of people don't teach that way.
So,
sorry, I was going to answer your question about do people go on to then get accredited? I would say more than half don't. They go along for their own benefit. They finish up as better ringers and more able to help, but they don't want to be accredited. There is no suggestion whatsoever that we're looking to a situation that they have in some sports and things where in order to coach, which is a paid job, you have to have the accreditation. It isn't, it's for your own benefit only. That's not to say that in 20 or 30 years it might not change, but it's not something that's being pushed for at the moment. And I know the biggest worry there some people have is about insurance. You know, if there is an accident, will the insurers say, oh, hang on, you weren't a qualified teacher, oh look, we're not going to qualify. And I know the people in charge, the ecclesiastical, there is one insurance body that does most church things in the Church of England anyway, and he is absolutely adamant, no, we support ART, we think it's improving the standard of teaching, but it is not a qualification you need in order to be insured. And that is absolutely crystal clear, and I think that's a point that needs making. So it is quite in order for people to come along and do that. Quite a few of them choose not to sign people up for the learning the ropes, which I think is a pity because that is very useful, but probably because they're not being the main teacher of anyone. They're just helping teaching. But technically, once you've done the module, you have 2 years, and that's been extended a lot during COVID time. So if you need an extension for a good reason, it's easily extendable. You have 2 years during which you can sign people up for learning the ropes and pass them at level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. At the end of that lapses unless you ask for an extension. And to continue, you either have to go along and do another module and start 2 years again, or you need to complete the various bits that do make you accredited, which effectively is doing an online test, which we recommend everyone does straight away anyway, and then doing the 4 annotated lessons with a friend in your own town, then eventually getting an assessor in. And there are a few local regulations about working with children check and that sort of things, but whether people wish to go ahead and do that or not is entirely up to you. And I would say probably more than half don't, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Is there anything you would suggest that after these courses have been run that we would do? I mean, I guess at the end of the courses, we would have a lot more people who have some how to teach handling knowledge, or feel more confident about teaching handling. So is there something we should do, not to celebrate it necessarily, but to kind of I mean, make a deal out of it, because this is a big step for, I mean, did you guys do anything like that in Australia, or you just kind of, everybody went off and they just had their increased skill and that was it? I just wonder if there's something that needs to be marked at the end of this, and maybe it's something we would have to decide ourselves, but it seems it's a pretty big deal. I mean, you're traveling a long way. A lot of these people are traveling. It's quite momentous, really.
Yes, I think today's gathering, I mean, the fact that you have these online gatherings is fantastic. It's a way of communicating over great distances. And I think forming groups, really trying to do what the mentor system would do if you had existing good teachers who can look after the less good teachers, which generally speaking hasn't worked. But if you can get people who've been on a course to have maybe a regular monthly meeting to start with, and maybe slightly less often after that, or maybe if you have a session on these gatherings where you say, well, everybody who went on the M1 course, any of them, let's just get together. And it doesn't actually matter much what you do. The ones we run for a group in Middlesex, it does tend to be a bit of a chat about what the weather's like, and then what people have been doing, whether they've got new learners and how they're coping with them, but in particular any problems they've got. That, you know, we've got this learner and I keep teaching them this and they keep doing it for a bit and then lapsing. What should we do about it? And everybody just contributes, and I think that helps keep the momentum going.
And they get to go ahead, Eileen.
Go ahead. You talk.
Well, okay, and they get to critique, give their feedback after the course. Is that right? And,
there's a feedback form, yes.
And you see that, and we would see that, and then
Yep.
that's also okay. That's it.
I'm disappointed that everybody on this call right now is on the red team. So it's none of the
it is a shame. Yeah.
none of the people that registered, and I thought we would see some of them or hear from some of them. I pushed it when I was in Quebec last weekend to get on to the session, because you can ask questions prior to you coming on the course. And nobody is on it. And I understand maybe the people that have already taken module 1 and module 2 wouldn't come on, or it's not convenient, but I would have thought someone out of the 44 or 45 people that have registered, of course, there's some of us.
Is Douglas Kitson? Douglas, please identify yourself.
Yep, that's me.
Yeah,
hello.
very good. Well, there's
Talking
one.
books.
There's one. Yeah.
Okay, can I just say the reason there are no Quebec ringers here is we've just finished ringing for a funeral. So people are occupied.
I'm glad you're here, Douglas.
I think that's a problem one always finds. I know with this Middlesex group, there's one person who we're particularly keen to push ahead. He's an interesting guy. I won't mention any names, but he was an established teacher, quite a good teacher. But when he did the M1 course, he came away with a lot of new ideas and said, oh, I haven't thought of that. And yes, I think I could do that better this way. His intent is always to change and improve and adapt a bit, but he finds it very difficult in practice to do it. When he gets into a tower with a learner, he reverts to what he's always done. And it's helping with something like that. But he's someone who frequently forgets the meetings, which is very disorganized. So there are always going to be frustrations like that. I think in terms of the response, the key statistic is, I don't know how many it is, but it's over 40 people. So, you know, a good 10% of people who ring in the North American Guild are coming along to one of the courses. That's a very high percentage. I mean, in UK, the proportion of people who actually actively teach or are tower captains or run things is much smaller. So that's a very good start.
David,
But yes, I think the answer is the follow-up is some form of ongoing gatherings of whatever sort.
Okay.
And obviously you're much more aware of your democratics than I am, but probably that means arranging visits from one tower to another in an area, but then more likely also having occasional online gatherings for communication, something like this. And given that you've got this existing setup, putting it on as a part of that sounds a very good idea.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
David, I was curious if it would make sense to kind of go through what you plan to do in each of these classes. Just kind of give a basic idea of what happens.
Yes, one of the things I'm hoping to do in the not too distant future is to talk to each of the locations now that everything's sort of more finalized and actually produce a program. We normally, let me see if I can find one. Sorry, I'm not very good at multitasking, being male.
No. No sexual stereotypes, please.
You're talking about an agenda or a timetable, a time frame of what you're going to do for each
Yes.
venue. And each venue might be a little different because the times, well, especially for Marietta, it's going to be different because it's over 3 days instead of just 2 days.
Yes. Yes, I might screen share for a moment now, so see if I can arrange that. Would it be?
Share screen.
I think this one. Oh, basic and advanced, that's new. So yes, it has worked, I think. This is just this is slightly more voluminous than I normally do because this was one I was running in UK. So that was just over a year ago. So it's describing to people basically what it does, and they might attend, what modules are offered. There's some frequently asked questions, which is what we've gone over here. You know, is it a formal qualification? Does attending the module make me an art teacher? Which we must really stress the answer is no. It's the first step of becoming accredited, which you may or may not choose to do. Am I expected to go on and complete the training? Well, it's entirely up to you. But then also a bit of indication of how to get to the place. And in particular, what I want to draw your attention to, this was more something that we gave out in advance to try and encourage people to sign up. But you can see here in these various colors here, this is a typical program. So normally one would open the church, and I and the local organizers would get there a bit early just to sort of, you know, turn the hot water on and stuff like that. So it's open for registration, so people can turn up, sign in, get themselves a cup of coffee. We do like to start promptly. There is usually a theory session, and typically in the PowerPoints, there's an introduction, which is what on earth is art all about. And then the first of the theory sessions, which is specific to that module. And in the case of M1, it's called Teaching a Skilled Activity. I think the titles haven't changed since then. And then we go into a practical. And the first practical, well, you can see there are 4 theory sessions. Part of the introduction, then skilled activity, becoming a good teacher, solving handling problems, and then finally, which is basically how you go online, how you log on to SmartRinger, how you sign people up, how you pass them at Learning the Ropes 1, that sort of thing, the details of how it all works. And the practical sessions, which invariably the first one is the most important, tries to cover the most and always overruns. And I can catch up a bit on the later ones, but this is the way they have it organized. So that the basic components practical is basically introducing people to bells, safety stuff, what have you. Your first pull on a rope, and then going on to doing backstrokes by themselves, and hopefully getting started on hand strokes by themselves. I'm skipping a lot of the details and oversimplifying. And then the second one is called joining 2 strokes together, but tends to be much more finishing off doing hand strokes and then doing the whole thing again when they're putting the 2 strokes together, because the process is much the same. When you start doing backstrokes, you either do or don't do. You can't say to someone half do the backstrokes, but the hand strokes, they can gradually join in. And one does that in teaching them hand strokes. Then one goes through the whole process again when they've got the tail end in their hand of gradually joining in the hand strokes as well. So joining the 2 strokes together, and that's usually the one where there's the most likelihood of needing to take over a rope. That's something we'll cover in the first session. Then ringing up and down is the third one. And normally by the end, we have quite a bit of fun in the last one, which is practically solving handling problems. And I usually ask everybody to demonstrate their favorite error. We try and spot what it is and suggest how you might correct it. That's quite entertaining. And that is a fairly typical timetable. We try and make the practical sessions at least an hour, and certainly the first one, preferably a bit longer than that. and the theory ones would be typically half an hour, a bit more maybe. And frequently the tea and coffee breaks there, you see they're fairly short. It's more a matter of, well, go across to the lecture and make yourself a cup of coffee, grab a biscuit, and meanwhile we'll start the PowerPoint. There's a bit of a gap for lunch. So that's more or less the program for each day. And that's something that I would hope in the next week or two to be sorting out with the individual locations, because as I say, particularly if some of them are a funny break with half one day, half the next, or if it's on a Sunday, there may be constraints about when one can ring and when one can't. But I'd hope to have that sorted out fairly soon. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks.
That's great, David.
How do I stop? Yes. And I would hope, actually, particularly because there'll be quite a few people who are doing one day, then the next day, that it might be possible for the local organizer to, you know, arrange a dinner somewhere that those who wish and are able can go along and just mingle and chat generally.
Anything else that should be said? Stop the recording.
I think I would urge, particularly the people here, particularly if you're mostly in the red team, to go along with several hats on. And one is, I mean, I always go along even if I'm giving the course. It's very unusual not to pick up something new, or someone's got a new idea. Oh, I'm sort of doing it that way. So partly, even though they're very experienced, to get the odd extra insight, partly with a view to, could we run these courses ourselves if you're intending to think about becoming a tutor, or if we're going to run our own courses, would they look a bit like this? It's quite a good template. And also what's going to happen as a result. And that's twofold. It's partly the, when all this is over, are we going to go fully down the art path or go our own way? There are strong arguments for each. And also, what follow-up activity should we do in terms of nothing to do with art, but just encouraging enthusiasm about recruiting, how you deal with learners, building up everything. What can we do as a follow-up, which is what we were talking about earlier. There's rather a lot of hats to wear at once. Oh, that's an interesting shot.
David, it's very informative. It's been very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Looking forward to meeting everyone in person. And as I say, we usually find the more experienced teachers do, but do certainly. I think the ANZAB modules, we tend to encourage contributions from the floor, as it were, more, possibly because we tend to keep, we usually have 2 tutors, which makes it easier. But also we tend to have slightly smaller numbers. I've been to some in UK where I've been shadowing, which might have 20 people. And it's very difficult with that number. You're just trying to get everybody through everything. There's very little time for them to give feedback. But certainly these ones, feedback will be very, very welcome, particularly if it's politely critical. And I would be hoping that it's you people who'll be, you know, sometimes you go along and everybody immediately is very chatty and wants to contribute. Other times they're a bit sort of silent, and, you know, it's the same in a class. Some classes are sort of receptive but not very contributing. So do contribute.